into another person's body, into the most vulnerable areas of a person's body. The martial arts also utilizes physics and kinesiology, the law of motion and environment, how your movement affects your body and your opponent. It teaches you the kinetic chain and balance, leverage, gravity, force, and resistance. There is also a heavy psychological component to martial arts. Much like learning how to play chess with your body, we can see this in arts like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even in boxing. You learn things like how to convince your opponent you're going to do something that you haven't done in order to distract or to create openings in your opponent. There's definitely a lot of mental games that go into fighting. Even in the preparation of fighting, there is strong psychology at play. When you put it all together, the martial arts is the application of the body science in motion. Therefore, the martial arts are inherent in the human form. Its techniques exist in the ether of potential, and they are made accessible by those who understand these sciences and explore its application for combat. In simple terms, all human bodies are generally the same, and the physics are the same. The techniques are inherent and can be figured out by anyone who understands the science and has the intent to use it. Drink to survive is all the same water with a flavorful twist. These martial arts are all the same thing, just flavored by the culture it comes from. I say this because all martial arts boils down to striking and grappling, be it kung fu, karate, taekwondo, savate. It's all kickboxing. It's all kicking and punching. The difference is the clothing, the sporting traditions, the music, etc., etc. Grappling, the techniques, Greco-Roman wrestling, ancient Egyptian wrestling, Senegalese wrestling, American wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Sambo. It's all grappling, while there may be minor differences. Unless you're a different creature, all human hand-to-hand combat boils down to striking and grappling, and there are only so many correct ways to use your body as a weapon effectively. Therefore, the difference between various martial arts is the traditions, rules of the sport, and aspect of martial art that they focus on. Nothing is new under the sun. Everything has been figured out and then forgotten. Boxing and wrestling has been around since Egypt, perhaps even before. We can divide the martial arts into categories based on what aspect of the one true martial art they specialize in. Although some may teach multiple aspects of a martial art, they are obviously more skilled at one specific aspect. For example, Taekwondo does mean the way of the fist and the feet, but their kicks are insane, while their punches do not compare to boxing punches. So let's divide the arts by specialty and culture. This is, of course, not to say that you can't get hurt by someone who throws Taekwondo punches. Of course you can, it's a punch. However, if you have someone who trained exclusively in Taekwondo, if they were in a rule set that only permitted them to throw punches versus a boxer, typically the well-trained boxer should do better. So let's divide the arts by their specialty and culture. Let's start with long-distance kicking arts. So let's start with long-distance techniques or kicking arts. Now, again, some of these do overlap. So one on my list is karate. Karate teaches more than just kicks, and it means empty hand. It utilizes knees, elbows, as well as punches, but certainly its kicks set it apart. Its punches are not as perfected as boxing, but it does utilize different palm strikes and fists, the hammer fists, back fists, which I think could be adopted into boxing in some way. Its knees are great, and so are its elbows, but they're not as refined and polished or used as often as Muay Thai. It does have throws, but karate's throws are not as complete as judo, so to speak. Karate does have a little bit of everything in it, especially in the sport of karate. They just don't spend too much time on the floor. In essence, the sport of karate is essentially kickboxing. Historically, karate led to the finding of kickboxing from Westerners who came to Japan and competed in karate tournaments. And when they brought karate back to the West and mixed it with boxing, we got kickboxing. But what separates karate from kickboxing and even Muay Thai, and the reason I count karate among one of the 7 essential martial arts, is for its conditioning. As opposed to any other martial art I've ever seen, karate has the most impressive and thorough conditioning, especially Kyokushin karate. Karate wishes to make the body like a rock. And the founder of Kyokushin, Masutasa Oyama, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, Masutasa Oyama is the quintessential go to the mountains for months upon years and stay there and train. This man, after World War II, went into the mountains of Japan and trained for 8 months to harden his body. And when he came back, he created the Kumite, which is a 100-man challenge. He would go for about a minute or two with an opponent, and then they would rotate and rotate. His opponents would get to rest if they went again. But he would have a total of 100 fights in one day, and he went on to do this 3 times. A Westerner recently completed the Kumite, earning his black belt in Kyokushin karate. His name is Judd Reed. Check him out. Legendary stuff. So the reason I count karate among one of the 7 essential martial arts is for its conditioning. Karate does have its roots in Kung Fu, as well as the different types of fists that can be applicable to non-glove fighting. They deepen the arsenals of techniques you can use with your hand, making it a much more deadly art. In truth, some of these techniques, if not all of them, originate with Kung Fu. Now, the reason I have karate over Kung Fu is you can become a karate master and enter karate tournaments and become a karate champion. Karate has been applicable in sports combat longer than Kung Fu. However, while I'm aware that Sanda is Kung Fu, Sanda is essentially kickboxing, Chinese kickboxing. Sanda has not been around as long as karate has been. Taekwondo. Taekwondo is heavily inspired by karate, but emphasizes in the area of the kicks. This is the #1 kicking art. If you go to Taekwondo tournaments, they rarely even throw a punch. They just set you up for one masterful, long-range flying kick. And this is great, but again, Taekwondo means the way of fist and feet. There is grappling in Taekwondo to the extent of throws and flips, but it isn't as complete as wrestling or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Judo. They do throw punches, but again, they're punches to boxing punches. This is not to say that a Taekwondo fighter cannot do any of these things, but their area of proficiency is kicking. Especially since they're the only art I know that throws multiple kicks, much like combination punching. They combination kick, which requires extreme dexterity. As opposed to karate, Taekwondo tends to throw kicks in bunches, whereas karate has more one-hitter quitters or two-kick combos for the most part. Muay Thai can be considered a full-range art, as it has punching, kicks, elbows, knees, clinch, and even some trips. But it doesn't have a lot of grappling techniques, nor is it good at working off your back on the ground. It has a strong kicking base. The Thai kick is one of the fastest and most devastating kicks you must have in your kicking arsenal. Its punching is decent, but not as refined as boxing. Its knees and elbows are some of the most defining characteristics, and I've seen them utilized here more effectively than anywhere else, due in part to the fact that a lot of it is done from the clinch, which I also find to be superior to other striking arts. I count Muay Thai among the essential martial arts because, unlike the other aforementioned martial arts, Muay Thai teaches you the clinch, how to throw elbows and knees effectively from the clinch. In addition, while Muay Thai does have a strong kick base, there are kicks in Muay Thai that you do not learn in Taekwondo or karate. That kick is the Thai roundhouse. The Thai roundhouse, as opposed to a Taekwondo kick, does not snap at the knee. It's swung much more like a baseball bat. In the next category, mid-range, one of the best arts for mid-range or punching range is boxing. Boxing is the best at punching. Its strength is that it's perfected punching at long range, mid-range, and even inside range. One of the best things about boxing is its defensive skills and reflex are the most practical and the best among striking arts, in that boxing teaches you the best head movement, upper body movement, and footwork, as well as practical blocking and clinching. The reason boxing is more polished in these areas is because boxers compete more often. In theory, a boxer who has perfected footwork, jabs, and uppercuts should never get taken down. They should never be in range to be taken down because their jab and footwork will keep you at arm's length and get them out. And if they can't get out, their timing and reflexes should be perfect to hit you with an uppercut. In theory. Boxing is also the easiest to learn. In addition, I find that boxers tend to be the best athletes next to wrestlers. There is some clinch grappling, however, its clinching is not as good as Muay Thai. It has no kicks, and you don't really learn how to check a kick in boxing. Instead, you use footwork to get out the way. There is no elbows, but some boxers have learned how to throw a punch and turn it into an elbow without anyone seeing it. There is no knees or headbutts, but again, some boxers have learned how to get away with it. Of all the martial arts, to the best of my knowledge, boxing has the longest and richest recorded competition history, the most publicized of title matches. I chose boxing as one of the most essential martial arts because Of its skills with the hands, they're second to none. In addition, boxing teaches the best footwork, head movement, and upper body movement. All of these skills are game changers when it comes to a fight. The first art I'd like to look at in the clinch range is Judo. Judo is the art and science of throwing motherfuckers. Judo uses the science of biomechanics and physics to make it easy to throw an opponent regardless of size and/or weight. Not much in the department of punching and kicking, but a good judoka can time your punch and clinch under it. He can time your kick and grab it and put you on your ass brutally. It differs from other grappling arts because it uses more refined techniques to throw. It is not force or struggle, but rather moving and guiding force based on the principle of leverage and to achieve a throw. Judo takedowns are typically from the hip, and they typically don't wrestle you to the ground. I count Judo among one of the essential martial arts because its throwing techniques are second to none. And using the principle of physics, it allows a fighter to throw another fighter regardless of size. Wrestling. Wrestling has been around even before the Greeks and the Romans. Arguably, the Greeks learned it from the Egyptians. Every culture has a form of wrestling. In fact, the name Israel comes from the word to wrestle with God. In fact, the name Israel means to wrestle with God. A man named Papa Jacob wrestled with God in his pineal gland, and he came out and changed his name to Israel. Wrestling, just as the name suggests, is to struggle. It is not as refined as judo, where often you may find a wrestler crashing into the opponent and struggling with them to the ground. Most fights end up in wrestling because fighting isn't polished and artistic. It's struggling against another person. However, effective wrestling utilizes slams to get their opponents to the ground. The idea of wrestling is to dominate your opponent by getting on top of them and pinning them. In wrestling, you cannot have your back on the ground. Therefore, most wrestlers do their best work with their back off the ground. I count wrestling among the essential martial arts for its toughness and conditioning, as well as efficiency in keeping your back off the ground, scrambling when someone tries to take you down, and the ability to take your opponent down with authority. Wrestling decides where the fight takes place. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. BJJ originated with Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, but it came to Brazil because Brazil had a crisis. The Portuguese brought a lot of Africans as slaves to Brazil. As such, the population, even post-slavery, of Africans versus Portuguese was greatly in favor of Africans. Even to this day, the greatest population of Africans outside of Africa is in Brazil. As such, the Portuguese offered very cheap, if not free land to many foreigners to come and change the demographic of the population. Many Japanese came to settle in Brazil, and through their interaction, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was born. BJJ, with its roots in Judo, has many throws from Judo as well as new ones and some from wrestling. But as opposed to wrestling, BJJ makes an art out of fighting on the ground, off your back. On your back isn't a bad place in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not for you at least, but very bad for your opponent if he doesn't know. It's a grappling martial art, so it starts from the clinch. There isn't any real kicking and punching, just chokes and joint breaks. Very efficient chokes and joint breaks. I count Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu among the essential combat sports because it has the unique skill of fighting off your back on the ground, which is essential because fights inevitably end up on the ground. Capoeira gets an honorable mention because it has techniques no other art has, and they're actually practical. The reason I didn't originally put Capoeira as one of the 7 is because you don't find people practicing Capoeira as a sport. People don't actually fight with Capoeira. They dance. Much like Kung Fu, you don't fight in Kung Fu tournaments. You have Sanda, but Sanda is comparable to kickboxing. In fact, it's Chinese kickboxing. So Capoeira was created by African Judoites enslaved in Brazil, and they were forbidden from practicing their martial art. They learned to hide their techniques in a dance, and thus Capoeira was born, a fight within a dance. This dance can distract your opponent and disguise your attack, which is a primary key in landing an attack. This dance also serves to add tremendous momentum to your attacks. While Capoeira has the most destructive yet fancy kicks around, they're severely lacking in punching and grappling. However, Capoeiristas have tremendous upper body, core, and lower body strength simply from their stance. It also requires a lot of stamina to maintain these moves. I would rank Capoeira a lot higher if they had competitions where you actually fought in Capoeira fights. The 7 most essential martial arts that make up the one true martial art are boxing for punching, head movement, upper body movement, and footwork. Taekwondo for combination kicking. Muay Thai for elbows, knees, clinch work, and hard kicks that Taekwondo don't use. Karate for different fist, body conditioning, and esoteric techniques that go all the way back to Kung Fu. Judo for throws, wrestling for slams, takedowns, takedown defense, and scrambles, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for fighting off your back and submissions. Capoeira could be counted among the essential martial arts because it teaches you the valuable skill of distracting your opponents with your rhythm. It also teaches you full body control, and it does have strong kicks comparable to Muay Thai and Taekwondo. It could potentially replace Taekwondo as a kicking art, or it could be supplemented into Taekwondo into one unified kicking art. If Capoeira had more real competition where you actually fought people, I'd put Capoeira as an essential martial art. But these arts together form the perfect empty-handed martial art, which ultimately is mixed martial arts. Now some may say, well, those are only arts that are good for sport and not real fighting. My answer to that is sport fighting is the closest thing to real fighting. In fact, it is real fighting. While there are rules and regulations on what you can and cannot do, and in a real fight there are no rules, these rules are there to prevent people from dying from real martial arts techniques. In regards to the many martial arts I left out that utilize these techniques that cannot be used in sport, many of those techniques are contained within karate and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Even wrestling has moves that they train to use to kill, but are not used in competition. Yet these martial arts and their martial artists are more practical and close to real fighting because they actually use their skills against another opponent who's trying to hurt them and could potentially kill them. Therefore, they've developed a reflex and are conditioned to respond to adrenaline, making their techniques more applicable and realistic. The arts that I left out do not compete and have not been pressure tested and have also not been showcased on the world stage. How do we know the efficacy of these techniques if we don't put them to the test? And again, many of these traditional martial arts techniques come from Kung Fu and karate comes from kung fu. So there are many esoteric techniques contained within karate that go back to traditional fighting systems that may not have been mentioned here. But nonetheless, if you want to learn martial arts, you're better off picking from one of these 7 martial arts because it'll be the closest thing to developing the reflexes and understanding of the body necessary for combat, whether it be for sport or self-defense. The true martial art is the combination of all arts into one megazord of martial arts. The true martial artist knows when to use what, that it transitions seamlessly into another art as if they were one, because indeed, they have always belonged together. And any human who understands the science can make up its techniques and call it whenever they want, but it's all striking and grappling, regardless of name and culture. The more closely a technique or system that follows these principles of sciences are, the more effective their techniques are. The difference, therefore, between all martial arts is culture and tradition. When we find martial arts that try to be something radically different or eccentric, that deviate from these principles, we find they tend to make less sense and be less effective, and create bullshit martial arts, like trying to reinvent the wheel when it's already been done right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you smash that like button and leave your thoughts in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, then please help me get this video to 1,000 views, and I'll be happy to make plenty more. You can also support this channel and take your striking game to the next level at the same time by purchasing a focus ball. Are you ready to take your striking game to the next level? Then you've got to get the focus ball. Dramatically improve footwork, timing, reflex, hand-eye coordination, head movement, and striking IQ. Lightweight and extremely portable, so you can train every time, everywhere with the focus ball.